What if Christopher Nolan directed the Avengers?
Whoa, that is the multiverse conundrum.
This July looks to be one of the most important months for the future of Marvel Studios. After years of mixed reception regarding its films and TV shows, years of starts and stops in terms of production, and years of hiring and letting go of talent, 2 events are supposedly going to put the once unstoppable blockbuster machine back on track for financial and critical success. And that's the release of Deadpool and Wolverine over the weekend, and Marvel Studios' Hall H panel happening shortly after. The reasons as to why these events are so important are the reasons as to why the studio is in the state that it's in the first place. See, these movies used to be very linear in nature, simple, cookie-cutter blockbuster films that serve the purpose of its greater story. Yes, some of these did differ in some aspects, depending on the respective plots, where some would lean to maybe a political thriller and others a comedic heist film. But more often than not, they generally had the same flow and kind of the same look. Not only did it work, but it sold like hotcakes. For 11 years, that was the case. And it looked like it was going to continue that success until the pandemic happened. And this is where the multiverse conundrum comes in. See, 2019 was a big year for Marvel Studios. Yes, Avengers Endgame was the film of that year, and it made a lot of money, fan service, pop culture relevancy, etc. But it also happened to be the year where Disney finally acquired 20th Century Fox, meaning they'd get the properties and franchises related with the company, and most importantly for this case, its Marvel IP as well. And so, with the world in a state of a global pandemic, Marvel laid the foundations for its multiverse saga, and it also started pushing TV shows on the Disney Plus streaming service. And that's the problem. To follow the story of the Marvel Cinematic Universe means to somewhat be aware of the general storyline. And again, it was simple, but with the introduction of its multiple TV shows, along with its 3 films in a year output, it's just too much at that point to keep up. In 2021, there were 4 shows and 4 films released. In 2022, there were 3 shows and 3 films released. And in 2023, there were 3 films and 2 shows released. So in just 3 years alone, they released 19 pieces of content. Between the years of 2011 and 2019, they released around the same amount. And to add insult to injury, these movies never looked the best in the first place, but they look worse in those 3 years.
Okay. Does that look real?
In that particular shot, no, actually. It doesn't really, right? When you look close.
It need to be more blue.
This is a gigantic problem, because instead of letting its story build upon years of character and world building, now it either feels rushed, or it feels like catching up on homework, or both. To the point where in 2022, Marvel announced 2 Avengers films that were slated to come out in 2025.
Once we have gotten through Phase 4, Phase 5, Phase 6, that will complete the second saga of the MCU, which is, of course, the Multiverse saga.
Thankfully, those plans have changed to let its world and story breathe a bit. But it also changed because of another thing, the Jonathan Majors situation. See, for a while, it looked like Majors was going to be the next big thing in Hollywood. That next leading man you'd see pop up in all the major studio films, as well as being the new big bad for Marvel's next 3 phases of film and television as Kang the Conqueror. That was the case until 2023, when he'd get convicted for harassment and assault. And the story took wind for the better parts of that year, further killing his promising acting career, leading to being dropped from the role shortly after. So now with a phase of films being centered around one guy shattered, the litany of polarizing reaction to the films and shows released, and the ever so decreasing box office numbers that these films used to get, it feels like the studio has pretty much hit rock bottom. So with the most crucial weekend in the studio's history since maybe Iron Man, how do you recover? How do you make a statement? And how do you get that trust that built a 10-year successful cinematic run? Well, they've actually already started working on it. First, they delayed their slate to help both production and post-production.
I think over the past few years, certainly with the amount of projects we'd had between Disney Plus and the features, there was an overabundance, let's say. product that I think people thought, geez, I love them all. I want to catch up on them all, but this is a lot to ingest.
And second, they're only releasing one film this year as a sort of reset in terms of its oversaturation within the industry.
Sometimes what seems like a disadvantage to have to be able to shuffle around ends up being something that is good. And the notion that we have one movie to focus on this year, I think is great, not just internally for us, but for audiences.
But there's a lot more to be done. This Comic-Con is the first real public panel since 2022. So what they really need to press on is to pivot from what was shown back then to a more stable slate of films and content, similar to how their first 10 years were, instead of this gluttony of confusing films. And from the sounds of it, the ground has already been set on that.
There's a sense that people say superhero fatigue. I actually think it's almost the feeling of having to do homework fatigue, right? These are all individual stories meant to be enjoyed as singular entities. The connectivity is a bonus.
But that's from a strategic and management point of view. What really matters is how this is told within the world's story and to the audience, and they need to be fairly firm with it. Communication and trust were a big part of Marvel's first 10 years, which is why Deadpool and Wolverine also need to land firmly as a critical success and a financial success. It needs to show how important it is to its greater universe rather than being something supplementary. It also needs to balance the sense of serving its own plots within the context of the film itself instead of serving its fans, which honestly is a very difficult thing to do. And it just needs to be a good, enjoyable summer blockbuster. Now, yes, these are low bars, but they're needed to set the tone for their big weekend, since the film releases worldwide on July 26th and Marvel Studios' panel is on the 27th. So now, the stage is set for them to emerge from this with a sense of optimism, and get back to their bread and butter that served them right for over a decade. And that's simple, emotional, linear blockbuster films that can serve their better part for its grander story. So, I just saw the movie and it was pretty good. It's not the greatest movie in the world by any means. There were a lot of problems with it, mainly its plot being a bit too timid, and the whole movie playing out a bit blocky and feeling rough around the edges, and really not knowing anything that was going on. But I had fun with it. And looking back at my 3 points, it's kind of a mixed bag of results. It's probably gonna make a lot of money because it has a lot of replay value, but in the future, I really don't think it's gonna hold up. And it kind of veers off from its own plot a lot of times. But again, I'll be honest, it was a good time at the theaters, which is what you want these movies to be. Not perfect, not great, but also not terrible. So with generally a good vibe going into Comic-Con, I really think they need to stick the landing. They really need to hammer in that sense of trust again, coming out of this weekend. And now the ball is on Kevin Feige's court, to see if the MCU really has a reliable future ahead of it.